8 years after my wife told me our baby died, a scared little boy knocked on my door, looked up with my exact eyes, and whispered, "Mom said you'd know me." In that moment, the life I thought I had buried came clawing back, and the truth was far worse than grief. I was 39 years old when a small knock on my front door split my life into two clean halves. Before that knock, there was the life I had learned to survive. After it, there was the truth. It was a gray Saturday in late October, the kind of afternoon when the sky hung low over the neighborhood and everything looked washed out. My house sat at the end of a quiet street outside Columbus, a modest two-story place with peeling white trim and a porch I kept meaning to repaint. I had a mug of coffee going cold on the table beside me and a stack of invoices spread across the kitchen counter. I ran a small custom cabinet business out of a rented workshop 10 minutes away, and weekends were usually for catching up on numbers, sanding the rough edges off the week, pretending I wasn't as alone as I really was. The knock came again, soft, hesitant, not the sharp rap of a delivery driver, not the familiar rhythm of my neighbor Walt borrowing a ladder or asking if I had jumper cables. This was different, careful, almost scared. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel and walking toward the door with that dull, ordinary annoyance people feel when they think life is interrupting them for something trivial. I had no idea my heart was about to be dragged backward through 8 years of grief, lies, and a pain so old I had stopped naming it. When I opened the door, I saw a boy standing on my porch. He looked about 8, maybe a little small for his age. He wore a navy hoodie 2 sizes too big for him, the sleeves swallowing half his hands, and sneakers that were damp around the edges from the wet grass. His hair was dark brown, almost black in the dim light, and it curled slightly at the ends where the mist had touched it. He held a worn little backpack against his chest like a shield, but that wasn't what froze me. It was his eyes, gray, clear, unusually bright, with that same ring of darker color around the iris I had seen every morning in my own mirror since I was a teenager. My mother used to joke that the men in our family all looked half worried even when they were happy because of those eyes. I had seen them in my grandfather's old photographs, in my own face, and now, somehow, impossibly, in this little boy standing on my porch. He looked up at me as if he had practiced this moment 100 times, and still almost lost his nerve. Then he whispered, "Mom said you'd know my eyes." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. The cold air pressed into my lungs and just stayed there. My fingers tightened around the edge of the door so hard the wood bit into my palm. The world didn't spin the way people say it does in moments like that. It narrowed. That's what happened. My porch, the wet leaves, the gutter dripping beside the steps, the distant bark of some dog 2 houses over. Everything shrank until there was only that child and the sentence he had just spoken. "Mom said you'd know my eyes." My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stared at him like a man staring at a ghost he's afraid to recognize. Because 8 years earlier, my wife had told me our baby died at birth. I had buried that sentence inside myself so deep it had become part of my bones. Back then, my wife Lena and I had been married for 4 years. We weren't rich. We weren't glamorous. We lived in a cramped apartment over a hardware store and counted grocery money down to the dollar. But we were happy in the quiet, stubborn way young couples can be happy when they still believe love is enough to carry anything. I was building furniture in a friend's garage for cash jobs. Lena worked the front desk at a dental clinic. At night, we'd sit on the floor because we still hadn't bought a proper couch, sharing cheap takeout and making plans we had no business making. A house with a yard, a dog, maybe 2 kids, maybe 3 if life was kind. When Lena got pregnant, I thought the universe had finally looked our way. I was unbearable about it. I know that now. I talked to her belly when the baby was the size of a peach. I painted the second bedroom in our apartment building even though the landlord told me not to. I spent hours sanding down a crib I found at a thrift store because I wanted our son or daughter to sleep in something made by my own hands. Every tiny thing felt sacred. The first kick, the first ultrasound photo, the first time Lena laughed and told me the baby seemed to wake up every time I played old soul music in the kitchen. I loved that child before I ever saw a face. Maybe that's why what happened next destroyed me so completely. Lena went into labor 3 weeks early on a night full of freezing rain. I drove us to St. Mary's with my hands slipping on the steering wheel because I was sweating so badly. The hospital lights looked too bright, too white, too cruel. Nurses rushed her through double doors, and I remember trying to follow before someone in blue scrubs stopped me with a flat palm against my chest. After that, everything came in fragments: a hallway that smelled like bleach and stale coffee, a vending machine humming in the corner, a clock on the wall that seemed to move and not move at all, a doctor I barely remember speaking in careful padded sentences, complications, distress. We did everything we could, and then Lena, pale, hollow, her hair damp against her forehead, her eyes swollen but dry in that frightening way people look when they've cried past tears. She held my hand and whispered the words that changed the shape of my life. He didn't make it. A son. I remember making a sound that didn't feel human. My knees hit the floor before I even knew I was falling. I remember Lena saying she didn't want me to see him. She said it would make it worse. She said the doctors had already taken care of everything. She said she couldn't go through it again, couldn't explain it again, couldn't survive me asking questions she didn't have the strength to answer. And I believed her. God help me. I believed her. Not because it made sense. It didn't. Not really. But grief is a strange drug. It makes you passive. It makes you obedient. It makes you accept things you would have torn apart under any other sky. I signed papers I don't remember reading. I sat beside Lena's hospital bed and held her hand while my whole future bled out somewhere I couldn't reach. I told myself there were procedures, protocols, reasons. I told myself hospitals knew what they were doing. I told myself my wife would never lie to me about something like that. For months after, I moved like a man underwater. I went back to work too soon because staying home felt worse. The little room I had painted became a locked door inside my own apartment. Lena stopped talking about the baby completely. No name, no photos, no box of keepsakes, nothing. If I brought him up, she shut down. Her shoulders would tense, her jaw would lock. Sometimes she'd leave the room. Sometimes she'd snap at me and say, "Why are you trying to make me relive this?" So I stopped. That was the beginning of the rot. Grief didn't bring us together. It hollowed us out in separate rooms. Lena grew colder, more secretive. She started disappearing for hours with vague explanations that didn't match. Her phone became glued to her hand. She changed the password. She slept facing the wall. I told myself trauma did that to people. I told myself everyone mourned differently. I told myself love meant patience. 2 years later, she left. No screaming fight. No plates shattered against walls. Just a suitcase by the door, and a face I barely recognized anymore. She said she couldn't live under the weight of our loss and my sadness. She said I reminded her of the worst day of her life. She said she needed to start over somewhere else. I asked if there was someone else. She looked away for half a second before saying no. That half second told me everything. The divorce was quick and ugly in the quietest way possible. No children to argue over, according to every document. No shared property worth fighting for. Just signatures, dead eyes, a marriage folded up and filed away. After that, I learned how to exist without expecting joy. I bought this house because it was cheap and far enough from the city to feel like a fresh start. I worked. I paid bills. I answered family questions with shorter and shorter sentences until they stopped asking. My mother died 3 years ago. My father lives in Arizona with a woman I've met twice. Most nights it was just me, the hum of the refrigerator, and whatever old memory decided to claw its way loose after midnight. And then this boy appeared on my porch. He was still standing there, watching me with a nervous kind of bravery, like he knew he had just detonated something and didn't know whether it would kill him too. I swallowed hard, but my throat felt raw. "What did you say?" I asked. His small fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. He looked over his shoulder toward the street, then back at me. And when he spoke again, his voice trembled. "My mom said, if I found you, you'd know I was yours." I stared at him so long he shifted his weight on the porch and glanced down, like maybe he'd already made a mistake just by showing up. Rainwater dripped from the roof in a slow, hollow rhythm. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. The whole world kept moving, but inside me, something had locked in place. I stepped back from the doorway. "Come in," I said, though my voice barely sounded like mine. He hesitated, just for a second. Then he crossed the threshold carefully, like he'd been taught not to touch anything that didn't belong to him. He stood on the entry rug with his backpack still clutched to his chest, his damp sneakers leaving faint marks on the floor. I closed the door behind him, and the click of the latch felt too final. The kitchen suddenly seemed too small, too quiet. I gestured toward the table. "You can sit there." He nodded and walked over, climbing into the chair slowly, with that awkward, careful movement kids have when they're trying to act smaller than they are. He didn't put the backpack down, just kept it in his lap, arms wrapped around it. I stayed standing for a moment because sitting felt too vulnerable. Then I pulled out the chair across from him and lowered myself into it. Up close, the resemblance hit harder, not just the eyes, the shape of his brow, the slight cleft in his chin, even the way he held tension in his mouth, like he was trying not to say the wrong thing. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. "What's your name?" I asked. He swallowed. "Eli." Eli. The name landed inside me with a strange ache. Soft. Simple. Familiar in a way it had no right to be. "How old are you, Eli?" "8. I turned 8 in May." 8. My hands went cold. If the dates lined up, and God, they lined up too well, then he had been born exactly when my son was supposed to be born. I pressed my fingertips against the table to steady them. "Who brought you here?" "My mom's friend drove me." He glanced toward the window. "She parked around the corner. She said I had to do this part by myself." My pulse thudded in my ears. "Your mom's friend?" He nodded. "Where's your mother?" At that, his face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. His eyes dipped. His little shoulders drew in. "She's at the hospital." The room went still again. "What hospital?" "I don't know the name." "In Cleveland." He fumbled with the zipper on his backpack but didn't open it. "She got sick a while ago. Then she got worse." Every word felt like stepping onto rotten wood. Never sure what would give way beneath me, I leaned forward. "Eli, what is your mother's name?" He looked up at me. "Lena." I actually flinched. There it was. No more, maybe. No more desperate, ridiculous hope that this was some misunderstanding, some bizarre coincidence, some cruel prank built out of half-truths and bad timing. Lena, my ex-wife, the woman who had looked me in the eyes and told me our baby died. For a second, my vision blurred. I saw the hospital hallway again, the fluorescent lights, the doctor's tired face, Lena's white knuckles in the sheets. Her voice, thin and flat, saying he didn't make it. I had built my whole grief around that sentence. And now her son, our son, if this was real, was sitting at my kitchen table, wearing a navy hoodie and staring at me with my own eyes. I pushed back from the table and stood so suddenly the chair legs scraped the floor. Eli jumped. I forced myself to breathe. "Sorry," I said quickly. "I'm sorry. I dragged a hand over my face. "I need a second." He nodded fast, like he was used to adults breaking apart in front of him, and had learned the safest thing was to stay quiet. That realization hurt almost as much as the rest. I turned toward the sink and braced both hands on the counter. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Anger started rising now, hot and sharp, cutting through the shock. Lena knew. She had known every single day for 8 years. Every birthday, every fever, every scraped knee, every lost tooth, every nightmare, every school form where a father's name could have been written. And she had kept him from me. The thought hit so hard I tasted metal. I looked out the window over the sink. My backyard was damp and gray, the grass flattened by rain, the old maple tree dropping yellow leaves one by one. It looked like any other afternoon. It felt obscene that the world could still look ordinary. When I turned back around, Eli was watching me carefully, not scared exactly, more like prepared for disappointment. That nearly broke me. I sat down again, slower this time. Eli, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, did your mom tell you who I am? He nodded once. She said you're my dad. The word hit me in the chest like a fist. Dad. No one had called me that. Not once. Not in 8 years. Not ever. I had imagined hearing it 1,000 different ways over the years. In a playground. In a grocery store. In the back seat of a car. Sleepy. Laughing. Hurt. Angry. Small arms around my neck. Tiny voice from another room. And now here it was. Attached to a child I had never held. Spoken in a careful little voice across a kitchen table on a rainy Saturday. My eyes burned. I blinked hard and kept going because if I stopped now, I wasn't sure I'd start again. What else did she tell you? He thought about it. She said you didn't know about me. His fingers twisted in the strap of the backpack. She said she did something bad, a long time ago, and that if she didn't tell me the truth now, then I'd hate her later. A cold wave moved through me. Did she tell you why? I asked. He shook his head. Not all the way. She said grown-up reasons. He paused. And shame, I laughed once. But there was nothing funny in it. Of course, shame. That convenient little coffin people bury other people in. Did she tell you today to come here? No, not today. He looked down again. She told me 3 days ago, before she went back into the hospital. Something in his voice on the word hospital made me soften whether I wanted to or not. Are you staying with someone right now? With Miss Carla. She's Mom's friend. The one who drove you? He nodded. And she knows you're here? Yes. I let out a slow breath. At least he hadn't wandered here alone. At least one adult in this mess had a functioning conscience. I looked at the backpack still locked in his grip. What's in there? He unzipped it and pulled out a wrinkled yellow folder, a water bottle, and a small plastic dinosaur with one eye scratched white. He set the folder on the table between us like it was something fragile. Mom said to give you this if you didn't believe me. I stared at the folder for a second before touching it. Inside were copies, a birth certificate, school registration papers, a few medical forms, and on the birth certificate, under father, the line was blank. That blank space made my stomach turn. But the mother's name was there, Lena Mercer, and the date of birth, May 14th, exactly when my son should have been born. Under the papers was an envelope with my name on it in handwriting I recognized instantly. My hand started shaking again. I opened it. Ashton, if you are reading this, then I finally did the one decent thing I should have done years ago. The first line nearly made me rip the page in half. I kept reading. I lied to you. Our son did not die. He was born early but alive. There were complications and I was afraid, not of losing him, of losing everything else. I had already made choices I didn't know how to undo. I told myself I was protecting everyone. Later I told myself too much time had passed, then more time passed. Then I became a coward who built her whole life around a lie. My vision blurred again. I gripped the paper tighter. He is yours. I know that. I have always known that. If you hate me, you should, but please do not punish Eli for what I did. He knows almost nothing, only that I have been sick and that I waited too long to tell him the truth. If I recover, I will answer whatever questions you ask me. If I don't, then at least he will not grow up believing his father chose not to be there. That last line gutted me, because that was exactly what he might have believed, that I knew, that I left, that I didn't want him. I folded the letter once, then again, very carefully, because if I let myself feel it fully right then, I was afraid I'd start screaming and never stop. Eli was watching my face. "Are you mad?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, not at the papers, not at Lena's handwriting, at him. His sneakers too wet, his hoodie too big, his eyes trying so hard to read mine before they got hurt. And in that moment I understood something with brutal clarity. Whatever rage I had for Lena, and it was there, alive and roaring. This child had walked into a stranger's house carrying fear that belonged to adults. He had crossed that distance alone because the people responsible for him had failed long before he ever knocked on my door. So I made my voice as gentle as I could. "I'm not mad at you." He held my gaze for one long second, as if testing the floorboards. "Really? Really?" His shoulders dropped a fraction. I swallowed past the ache in my throat. "Eli, has anyone ever shown you pictures of me before?" He nodded. "Just one. Mom kept it in a book." "What picture?" "You were younger. You were holding a fish." He made a small shape with his hands. Not a big one. Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. Short, broken, but real. "That sounds right." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. I stood and opened the fridge, mostly because I needed to move. "Are you hungry?" He hesitated before nodding. "What do you like?" He shrugged with the same careful uncertainty he'd had since stepping inside. "Anything's okay. Anything's okay." Another little sentence that said too much. I checked the fridge. Leftover roast chicken, bread, cheese, apples, some soup I'd made Thursday. Ordinary food. Suddenly it felt like the most important meal of my life. I can make grilled cheese or heat up soup. He thought very seriously about this. "Both?" I turned and looked at him. He looked embarrassed instantly. "Sorry, that's too much." "No," I said, too quickly. "No, it's not too much." I cleared my throat and reached for a pan. "Both is fine." While the butter hissed in the skillet, the silence shifted. Not comfortable exactly, but less sharp. Ellie set the dinosaur beside his folder and watched me cook with a focus that made him seem younger than he had a minute before. "Do you really make stuff out of wood?" he asked. I glanced back at him. "Who told you that?" "Mom. She said you build things." "I do." "Like tables?" "Sometimes." He pointed at the cabinets. "Those too?" "Those especially." He nodded as if filing that away somewhere important. "My shelf broke last year," he said. "The one with my space books." I swallowed. "Well," I said carefully, "I'm pretty good at fixing shelves." That almost smile came back. When I set the plate in front of him, he looked at it for a second like he wasn't sure he was allowed to start. Then he picked up the sandwich with both hands and took a bite so fast I had to look away for a moment. Because there are some kinds of hunger that tell stories no child should have to tell. I sat across from him with my own untouched coffee and watched him eat. Not in a creepy way, not in a suspicious way. In the stunned, aching way a man watches 8 lost years breathe in front of him and realizes there is no version of this where he ever gets them back. When he finished half the sandwich and most of the soup, he slowed down. His eyelids looked heavy. "How long have you known where I live?" I asked softly. "Miss Carla found you." "How?" "Mom had your old name and city in a box. Carla used the internet." That made sense. Barely. Everything in this day felt stitched together by panic and late regret. I looked at the clock on the stove. Just after 4. Eli, I said, I need to talk to Miss Carla, and I need to figure out what's happening with your mom. He nodded, but his hand moved instantly to the backpack again. The fear was back. Am I staying here? He asked. There it was, the real question under all the other questions. Not biology, not paperwork, not blame. Was he being sent away again? I leaned forward and kept my eyes on his. You're not going anywhere until I know you're safe. His lower lip trembled once, just once. Then he pressed it flat. I reached for my phone, and as I did, I realized with a cold, rising certainty that this was only the beginning, because somewhere in Cleveland, the woman who had stolen 8 years from me was lying in a hospital bed. And before this was over, I was going to hear every last word of the truth from her own mouth. I called Miss Carla from the number stored in Eli's folder, and the moment she answered, I knew from the tightness in her voice that she had been waiting beside that phone like a person guarding the edge of a cliff. This is Ashton, I said. Eli is with me. Her exhale came out shaky. Thank God. I looked across the table at him. He had finished the last of the soup and was tracing the scratched eye of the little dinosaur with his thumb, trying very hard not to look as tired as he was. I need the hospital name, I said, and I need the truth. She was quiet for a beat. Then she gave me the name of a medical center outside Cleveland and an ICU floor number. Her voice dropped when she said, Lena's been asking for you on and off for 2 days. She didn't think you'd come. A hard laugh almost slipped out of me. She wasn't exactly working from a strong history there. I know, Carla said softly. I know. But whatever she did, she's been living inside it for years. And right now, she may not have much time left. That should have satisfied something ugly in me. It didn't. It only made my chest feel heavier. I asked a few more questions. Carla answered what she could. Lena had been sick for months, ovarian cancer, advanced by the time they found it. She'd hidden that too, apparently. Hidden it until the treatment stopped working and the doctors started speaking in gentler voices. Carla had been her friend since a bookstore job years ago. She was the one who finally pushed her to tell Eli the truth, to tell me, to stop trying to die with the lie still intact. When I hung up, the kitchen felt smaller than before. I looked at Eli. I need to go see your mom tonight. His eyes lifted fast. Can I come? The question hit me harder than it should have. Not because it was unreasonable, because it was so careful. He wasn't assuming he belonged in the decision. He was asking permission to be near his own mother. Yes, I said. But first, you need a little sleep. He opened his mouth to protest, and then yawned so wide he ruined his own argument. That almost broke me again. I showed him the guest room upstairs. It wasn't really a guest room, more like a storage room with a pull-out couch and a bookshelf I never finished organizing. I changed the sheets with hands that still didn't feel fully connected to my body. He stood in the doorway holding the dinosaur, watching me with that same quiet caution. You can rest here for a bit, I said. I'll wake you before we leave. He nodded. Then, just as I turned toward the door, he asked, Are you really coming back? I stopped cold. The room seemed to tilt around that sentence. I looked at him, this boy with my eyes and years of other people's damage already tucked into the way he spoke, and I understood just how many promises had already failed him. Yes, I said, I'm really coming back. He studied my face, then climbed onto the bed without taking off the hoodie. Within 3 minutes, he was asleep, one hand still curled around the little plastic dinosaur. I stood there a long time. There's a certain kind of grief that doesn't cry. It just stares. It takes inventory. The 2 big clothes. The way he slept like someone who expected to be moved at any second. The fact that he had come to a stranger's house with his whole life in one worn backpack. By the time I stepped back into the hallway, something inside me had changed shape. The shock was still there. The fury, too. But beneath both, something stronger had started settling into place. Responsibility. Not theoretical. not sentimental, not the kind men put into speeches to make themselves feel noble. Real responsibility. I was his father, and whether I had been robbed of that role or not, whether Lena was dying or not, whether the next 24 hours brought healing or more wreckage, that fact was now alive in the world. It had hands and eyes and a tired little body sleeping in my house. I packed an overnight bag in 10 minutes. Then I called my foreman, Walt, and told him I wouldn't be at the shop for a few days. He started asking questions. I cut him off with, "It's family," and my voice must have sounded strange because he immediately stopped. By 7:30, Eli was awake, washed up, and sitting in the front seat of my truck with the seatbelt buckled too high across his shoulder. The road to Cleveland stretched dark and wet ahead of us. He held the dinosaur in one hand and stared out the window at the headlights sliding past. For the first hour, neither of us said much. Then, softly, he asked, "Did you really not know?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "No," I said, "I didn't." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "Mom said maybe you'd be angry." "I am angry," I said, "because I wasn't going to start this relationship with another lie." "But not at you." He looked down at the dinosaur again. "Sometimes she cried when she thought I was asleep," he said. "A lot this year." I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know if it was confession, defense, or just a child laying a piece of the truth between us, because he didn't know where else to put it. So I said the only honest thing I had. "I'm sorry, Eli." He didn't answer, but after a few miles, he leaned his head against the window and fell asleep again. We reached the hospital a little after 10. Hospitals at night have their own kind of silence, not true silence, machine silence, soft shoe silence, elevator silence, the kind that makes every human voice sound thinner than it should. I woke Eli gently and carried his backpack while we went inside. He stayed close to my side without being asked. The fluorescent lights washed the color out of everything. The woman at the ICU desk checked Lena's room number, then looked at me and Eli, and whatever she saw in our faces made her stop using her customer service voice. "She's awake right now," she said quietly. "But she's weak." Weak. That word turned out to be far too small. When I walked into Lena's room, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman in that bed looked like Lena after life had been wrung through barbed wire. Her cheekbones were sharp. Her skin had that pale, almost translucent look serious illness gives people, as if they're already halfway lit from another world. Her hair, once thick and chestnut brown, had grown back in thin patches after treatment. Tubes ran into her arms. A monitor blinked beside her with calm, indifferent rhythm. But her eyes were still hers, and the second they found mine, they filled. "Ashton," she whispered. I stopped at the foot of the bed. Every version of this moment I might have imagined on that drive vanished. I had thought maybe I'd explode. Maybe I'd demand answers immediately. Maybe I'd throw 8 years of pain at her like broken glass. Instead, I just stood there, numb with exhaustion and fury and disbelief, while the woman who had detonated my life looked at me like she had been waiting at the bottom of a well. Then her gaze shifted past me to Eli. He moved closer to the bed. "Hi, Mom." Her face crumpled. "Oh, baby," she breathed. "You came." He nodded, but he didn't smile. He just stood there, small and solemn, as if he already understood that this room was a place where pretending had ended. She reached for his hand. He gave it to her. Then she looked back at me, and there it was, that terrible mixture of guilt and fear and selfish hope. "I'm sorry," she said. 3 words. Pathetic after 8 years. My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. "You're sorry?" I said, my voice low enough that it made Eli glance at me. "You told me my son died." Tears slid down her temples into her hair. "I know." "No," I said. "You don't get to say I know like that covers anything. You let me bury him in my head for 8 years. You let me grieve a child who was alive. You let him grow up thinking I wasn't there. So don't tell me you know." Her breathing hitched. Eli's fingers tightened around hers. I saw it then, the way he was looking between us, trying to understand how to hold both his mother and this new father in the same room without losing either. So I forced myself to step back from the edge. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, gathered what little strength she had, and opened them again. "I was pregnant before that conference in Chicago," she said, voice thin and ragged. "Before the last months of our marriage got bad." I frowned. "What conference?" Her gaze dropped. Shame moved across her face like a shadow. "The one where I saw Daniel Mercer." The name hit some old locked drawer in my memory. Daniel, her ex from before me, the one she always called immature, over, meaningless, the one she swore I never had to worry about. A cold sensation crawled down my back. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "One night. One stupid, disgusting mistake. And when I found out I was pregnant, I counted dates until I made myself believe it could be yours. I wanted it to be yours." The room went utterly still. I felt the blood drain out of my face. "You didn't know," she said quickly, reading it in me. "I never told you because I convinced myself it didn't matter. Then the baby came early. There were complications, and when they took him, they ran blood tests because of something in his charts, and—" Her breath shook. "And I found out he wasn't yours." I stared at her. For a second, I couldn't hear the monitor anymore. Couldn't feel my own hands. "Not yours." The words detonated in reverse this time, tearing through the miracle before it had even settled. I turned slowly toward Eli. My eyes, my brow, the strange familiarity, and suddenly I saw everything I had wanted to see. Not because it was there, because I needed it to be there. He was watching me now with naked fear. "Mom," he whispered. Lena broke completely then. "I panicked," she cried. "I thought if I told you I'd lose everything. I thought you'd leave. I thought everyone would know what I'd done. So when they asked if you wanted to see him, I said no. I told them his father wasn't coming. I signed the papers alone. Then I went back to you and said he died." I couldn't move. My mind was trying to hold two truths at once and failing. The first, this child was not biologically mine. The second, he had still lost 8 years because of a lie told in my name. Lena kept talking through tears and oxygen-thin breaths. "Daniel disappeared when I told him. He said it might not even be his. He blocked me. I hated him. I hated myself, and then every year that passed made it harder to tell the truth. I kept thinking I would fix it later, that I would wait for the right time. There never was one." My hands were shaking again. I laughed once, but it came out hollow and ugly. "So you let me mourn a dead son while raising another man's child in secret?" She closed her eyes. Yes, there was nothing left in the room but ruin. I should tell you I turned and walked out dramatically. I should tell you I slammed the door, punched a wall, cursed her until security came. That would make sense. It would sound like justice. But that's not what happened, because behind me, I heard a small voice crack. "Then who's my dad?" I turned. Eli was staring at his mother now, not at me. His face had gone white. His lips trembled once, then flattened. He looked older in that second than any 8-year-old should. Lena sobbed. "Daniel Mercer. But he's not, he was never, you said he was dead," Eli whispered. "I know. You said I had your dad's eyes. I know." His breathing got faster, not crying yet. Worse. That stunned little pre-cry silence where a child is trying to keep his whole world from splitting open in public. I moved before I thought about it. I crossed the room and crouched beside him. He looked at me with absolute terror. And in that moment, biology became the least important fact in the room because whatever his blood said, I was the man standing here while his world collapsed. Hey, I said gently. Hey, look at me. His eyes found mine. You are not alone in this room. Do you understand me? His chin wobbled. But you're not. I took a slow breath. No, I said. Not by blood. That hurt to say. God, it hurt. But I am here, right now. And I'm not walking out on you tonight. The first sob tore out of him so suddenly it made Lena start crying harder. Eli folded into me like something finally gave way. I wrapped my arms around him and held on while his whole little body shook. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Long enough for my knees to ache. Long enough for the monitor to keep blinking. Long enough for something inside me to stop asking what I had lost and start asking what this boy needed next. Eventually, his crying eased into hiccuping breaths. I helped him sit in the chair by the window with his dinosaur in his lap. Then I stood and looked at Lena. There was no softness left in me for her, only clarity. You should have told the truth 8 years ago, I said. You should have told it 3 years ago. You should have told it 3 months ago. You don't get forgiveness tonight just because you're dying. She nodded through tears. I know. I'm going to find Daniel Mercer. Her eyes widened. Ashton, I'm going to find him, I repeated. Because Eli deserves the truth, legal answers, and someone to answer for disappearing before he was born. Lena's face crumpled. He won't come. Maybe not, I said. But that won't be Eli's burden to carry alone. I looked toward the boy by the window. He had stopped crying, but he still looked wrecked, exhausted, lost, and I heard myself say the next words before I had fully decided them. Until that gets sorted out, he stays with me. Lena stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. What? You heard me. Her mouth shook. After everything I did, why? I looked at her for a long time. Because I could have said duty, or pity, or because no child should bounce between dying secrets and vanished men. But the truth was simpler and harder. Because he came to my door, I said. And because whatever you stole from me, you also stole from him. I won't let him pay for that alone. She broke again then, but I was done watching her cry. I spent another hour with the social worker on call, then another with Carla, who came to the hospital near midnight and looked at me like she didn't know whether to thank me or apologize on behalf of the entire human race. We got the basics started. Temporary guardianship paperwork, emergency contact forms, a plan for the next 48 hours. By the time Eli and I walked back through the hospital lobby, the sky outside had turned the deep black blue that comes just before dawn. He looked wrecked. I put the backpack over my shoulder and held the passenger door for him when we reached the truck. Just before climbing in, he stopped and looked up at me. Why are you helping me? He asked. There it was again. That terrible question children only ask when the world has taught them love is conditional. I crouched so we were eye level. Because none of this is your fault. He searched my face. But you're not my dad. Not by blood, I thought. But maybe fatherhood isn't always born where people think it is. I rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. No, I said softly. Not the way we thought. His face fell, just a little. So I added, but I'm still here, and for tonight, that's enough. He nodded. On the drive back, he fell asleep before we hit the highway. His head tipped awkwardly toward the window. Dinosaur still clutched in one hand. The sun was just beginning to stain the horizon pale gold when I pulled into my driveway. I carried him inside. He barely stirred when I laid him in the guest bed and pulled the blanket over him. He only mumbled one thing, half asleep. Don't let them move me again. My throat closed. I won't, I whispered. And for the first time in 8 years, I understood something with absolute certainty. I had lost a son who was never mine. But somewhere between a knock on the door and a hospital room full of lies, I had been handed something else. A choice, not revenge, not blood, not the fantasy of getting back what was stolen. Something harder, to stay, and this time I would.